What is one secret you have never told your parents and still don't plan on telling? Story 1. I grew up with divorced parents and lived with my mom and stepdad. My dad had struggled with substance abuse, but still took me every few weekends, and I loved him deeply despite his flaws. At 14, my stepdad passed away, and my mom became a distant, closet alcoholic. During this time, my dad decided to turn his life around for my sake, spending 2 years in a live-in rehabilitation center. Meanwhile, my mom left me alone in our family home from ages 14 to 16 while she pursued a new relationship in a town hours away. Although I kept them updated with stories of good grades and involvement in extracurricular activities, it was all a lie. I had fallen into a spiral of hard drugs, becoming addicted to coca, MDMA, and alcohol. I resorted to stealing food to survive, but I also stole clothes, makeup, and alcohol, anything I wanted, simply because I wanted it. I attempted to take my own life multiple times, all within the span of 2 years. I don't plan on ever telling either of them about what truly happened during that time. Story 2. When I was a junior in college, I lived off campus with 5 other guys in a questionable neighborhood. One Tuesday night, while a few of us were high and watching TV, 2 men broke in and robbed us at gunpoint. They were searching for a drug dealer but had the wrong house. The dealer who supplied everyone at school lived next door. None of us ratted him out, fearing it would bring even more trouble. The intruders tore our house apart, searching for a stash that didn't exist. When they couldn't find anything, they grabbed some random, worthless decorations and got ready to leave. As they were heading out, one of my roommates, big, burly, and usually quiet, snapped and grabbed one of the guys. The intruder turned and fired 2 shots, hitting my friend in the leg and the stomach. He survived but spent a month in the hospital recovering. None of us could fully move past the trauma. After the short and ultimately fruitless investigation concluded, most of us withdrew from school and went back home. I stayed until the end of the semester. When I returned home, I told my parents that I wanted to transfer to a school closer to home, without sharing the real reason for my decision. I have 2 younger brothers, and I didn't want my parents to fear sending them away for school. More importantly, I didn't want my brothers to be too afraid to leave home and explore the world. Story 3. When I was 17, I went to court and lost my driver's license for what ended up being 4 years. My parents knew about that part. One day when I was 18 and living in a flat with a friend about 15 kilometers away from my parents, I decided to head over to their house to retrieve my car, which was stored in their garage. My plan was to catch a train and bus early the next morning to get there. The night before, I got really high and stayed up until about 3 a.m. I decided not to sleep because I was worried I'd miss my 7 a.m. alarm. Instead, I left my flat at 6 a.m. and made the 2-hour journey, arriving at my parents' house around 8 a.m. after they'd already left for work. When I got there, I realized my dad had taken my car to work, leaving his car behind. Not wanting to waste the day, I decided to take his car instead. I drove it back to my flat to shower and get ready. Once I got home, I sat on the couch exhausted. Turns out, staying up all night while high wasn't the best idea. I fell asleep. I woke up to the sound of my phone ringing. It was 6:30 p.m., and my dad was calling me. Panicked, I answered, thinking I'd been caught. He told me he was downstairs at my flat, dropping something off that I'd asked for earlier in the week. I grabbed his car keys from the table, stuffed them into my pocket, and ran downstairs to meet him. After we talked, I walked out of sight, then bolted 2 streets over to where I'd parked his car. I jumped in and floored it, taking a different route back to his house to avoid running into him. On the way, I called a friend who lived halfway between my parents' house and mine, pleading with him to meet me at my parents' place to pick me up. I quickly explained the situation as best as I could. To buy some time, I called my dad and asked him to stop and check if I'd left some shoes in the trunk of my car. After some convincing, he stopped to look for the non-existent shoes. Meanwhile, I sped past the one intersection where I thought our paths might cross and raced to my parents' house. I parked his car in the driveway, jumped into my friend's car, and left just as my dad was driving out of his street. Luckily, he didn't see me. I will never tell him this. Ever. Story 4. When I was a junior in college, I spent a semester studying in Spain. One night, I went out to a massive club with some friends. At some point, my phone died, and my friends, being the assholes they were, left me behind. I was really drunk and ended up talking to a guy, asking him where I could get coca. That's where I seriously messed up. I got into a car with him and a group of other Spanish guys. They drove me outside the city to a place I didn't recognize. During the ride, I hid my credit cards, money, and ID in my underwear, preparing to get robbed. But to my surprise, they didn't rob me. Instead, they brought me to a sketchy house to get drugs. I bought a small amount of coke but was panicking the whole time. The guy I'd met started doing hero right in front of me. I just wanted to go home, but had no idea where I was. Eventually, the guy and I ended up wandering around the city. At one point, he admitted they had planned to rob me, but decided not to because they thought I was a cool guy. I finally made it back to my place the next morning around noon. I never told my parents about what happened because I felt like a complete idiot and couldn't stop thinking about how badly things could have gone that night. Story 5. When I was 13 and my younger brother was 11, we stayed at the mall way past our curfew by several hours. This was back when cell phones weren't a thing, so there was no way for our parents to check in on us. On the way home, we came up with a lie to avoid getting into trouble. We told our mom we had been detained by a mall security guard for running down a back hallway. To make the story believable, we based the security guard on a real person, describing him as looking like pro wrestler Dean Malenko, just in case we were questioned separately. It seemed foolproof. What we didn't know was that there was an actual guy in our area posing as a police officer and abducting children. When my mom heard our story, she panicked and called the police. My brother and I were interviewed separately, and we stuck to our fabricated story. Shockingly, the lie held up. The police even told my mom there was a good chance the man we described could have been the suspect. There may have even been a news mention about a sighting of this guy at the mall we frequented. In the end, our lie caused unnecessary panic, disrupted an investigation, terrified our mom, and got us banned from walking to the mall alone for 6 months. All because we didn't want to admit we were 3 hours late coming home. It was a stupid move, but no one ever figured it out. Story 6. I will never tell my dad about the time I dropped my baby brother in the ocean and almost lost him. I was 15, and my brother was just about a year old. I was holding him on the beach while the rest of the family was playing in the water. Since he loved the splashes from the waves, I decided to wade out into the water, where it came up to just below my waist. The surf was calm and he was laughing, so I thought everything was fine. Out of nowhere, the tide pulled back dramatically and returned with a much larger wave, easily twice the size of the previous ones. I turned to head back to shore, but the wave rushed in faster than I could move, crashing into us and reaching up to my face. The force of the wave knocked my brother out of my arms, and I was instantly blinded by the seawater. Panic set in as I groped around frantically in the dark, stinging water. I couldn't see anything, but by some miracle, I managed to grab hold of his ankle and pull him back up. He coughed and sputtered a bit but didn't cry and seemed completely fine. Shaken, I immediately got out of the water and stayed on the beach with him for the rest of the day. To this day, I've never told my dad about how close I came to losing my baby brother in the ocean. Story 7. As a teenager, I was emotionally unstable and struggled a lot. When I was 17, my mom forced me to join the army. It was either that or being kicked out of the house. With barely 2 hours' notice, I packed my things and said hurried goodbyes to my friends, who I was fighting with at the time. Basic training was hell. I hated every second of it. I cried almost every night and felt completely trapped. If I quit, I'd be homeless. By the time we started live fire training, I was at my breaking point. I had random emotional breakdowns every few hours and couldn't escape my thoughts. To keep my mind busy, I started thinking about things, and my thoughts drifted to the ammo they'd given me. 5 magazines with 30 rounds each, 150 bullets in total. I did the math. 45 people on the range, 3 shots each, and I'd still have some rounds left. I even thought about how the sound wouldn't alarm anyone because it was a firing range. There was a barbed wire fence nearby that would be easy to climb. I could do it. Apparently, even though everyone had earplugs in, someone overheard me mumbling. The next day, I was put under observation and sent to talk to a counselor to make sure I wasn't a danger to my course mates or myself. That incident stayed on my military record until I finally quit 3 years later. I never told my parents. My mom would be mortified, and my dad would never let me hold a gun again. They wouldn't understand the mental, emotional, and physical hell I went through that summer. Story 8. While traveling alone in Scotland, my parents sent me money to treat myself to a nice night in a private hotel. I booked a room at the Point in Edinburgh. Since I hadn't been able to enjoy much Soul exploration during my trip, staying with friends and such, I decided to try something new, browsing online for a potential hookup. I ended up inviting a man I found on Craigslist, who was 18 years older than me and also Canadian, over to my room. The chemistry was incredible, and we had some of the best of my life. I assumed it would just be a one-time thing, but we stayed in touch and rekindled the affair 2 years later. Here's where it gets complicated. He's married with 3 kids. It goes against everything I believe in, but he confided that his wife hasn't been intimate with him in over 5 years. The connection between us is electric, and I struggle to reconcile the situation. If my parents ever found out, it would be a disaster. I'm 25 now and no longer a kid, but I broke all their rules. Meeting strangers online, hooking up with a much older man, engaging in an affair, and going against their Christian values. It would be a complete storm. Story 9. I need to get this off my chest. When I had just turned 18, my parents bought me a brand new car. It was a huge deal because my family didn't have a lot of money, and I had been working a great job as a stockbroker at the time. Unfortunately, I had terrible friends. 6 months after getting the car, the new Fast and Furious movie about drifting came out. A friend invited me to see it, and afterward, we picked up some beer at a gas station and started drinking. He was drunk, and I was tipsy, feeling invincible. There's an S-curve road in my city, and I decided to try drifting my car. After a few attempts, my friend insisted he could do it better. I let him drive, thinking nothing could go wrong. He started to drift but lost control, hitting an embankment. My car flipped multiple times. Time seemed to slow down as I saw my life flash before my eyes with each flip. Miraculously, we both walked away without a scratch. A passerby called 911 after seeing my car overturned. Hearing the sirens, my friend grabbed a six-pack from the car and ran to hide it in some bushes. He then told me to lie to the police, saying I was driving and swerved to avoid an animal, causing the crash. The police believed the story, as did the insurance company and my parents. But what hurt the most was deceiving my parents. They believed me, and their trust made the lie feel even worse. After the accident, I asked my so-called friend if he'd contribute anything toward fixing the car. He blamed me, saying it was my fault for letting him drive drunk. We never spoke again after that. To this day, my parents don't know the truth about what happened. Story 10. Back when I was a senior in high school, my friends and I would practice what we called our skills. It was harmless fun, picking locks, avoiding security cameras, sneaking around. It was mostly just about testing ourselves and being annoying, not causing any real harm. Until one night when we took it way too far. There was a lab outside of town that had a government contract. They manufactured specific components for military rockets. I toured the facility earlier in high school, and it was incredible to see rockets and explosives up close. One night, my buddy and I decided to see if we could sneak into the lab. We made it onto the property, picked a few locks, and eventually stumbled upon a back door that was unlocked. Jackpot. Once inside, we found a rocket box containing 5 military rockets. In the moment, it seemed like the coolest idea ever to take them and show them off to our friends. Halfway home, the reality of what we'd done hit us hard. We had just stolen from the U.S. government. Panicking about what could happen to us, we decided to ditch the evidence. We grabbed my friend's boat, drove to the middle of a lake, and threw the rockets and the box overboard. A few days later, we saw a news article about the missing rockets. It mentioned that government agencies were investigating the theft. We were terrified, but we never got caught. I guess our skills were better than we thought. Looking back, it was an unbelievably stupid thing to do, and I can't believe we got away with it. Story 11. I'm an atheist, which is complicated given my family's deeply religious background. My father is a pastor, as are 2 of my uncles, 2 of my aunts and their husbands. 3 of my cousins are also pastors, and another is in seminary. Religion runs deep in my family. My dad, despite his role, has always been progressive and liberal in his faith. He taught me to think critically, encouraging questions rather than blind devotion. Over time, I reached the conclusion that I can't believe in God. My atheism isn't a reaction to the bad things religion or religious people have done. It's simply the result of how I interpret and understand the world. Even though I no longer believe, I still go to church and participate in all the rituals, but it's purely for my family's sake. It feels strange, almost dishonest, and I often feel like an imposter. The closest comparison I've heard is from my gay friends who remain in the closet with their families. What makes it harder is when my dad expresses how proud he is of me for my faith. To be clear, he's not proud of blind devotion or rigid adherence to church teachings. Instead, he's proud of how critically I approach my beliefs and how I've resisted the negative aspects of modern Christianity. He believes I'm still close to God in my own way, but I know the truth. Sometimes I feel like with one more step, he might land in the same place I am. Maybe he already has, and we're both just afraid to admit it to each other, that neither of us truly believes in God anymore. Story 12. In high school, I dated a girl I was completely in love with. It was the kind of intense, idealistic love where we even lost our virginity to each other. That part is normal and not what I'll never share. It's what came with it that's complicated. When we started dating, I thought her grandmother lived with them. It seemed typical. People get older and move in with family. But the truth was the opposite. Her whole family was living with her grandmother. The reason? Her dad was a major coca dealer, and their house had been raided after someone unknowingly sold to an undercover cop. Both her parents were awaiting trial, her dad for dealing and her mom for knowingly spending drug money. She was into pot and occasionally did acid, which wasn't my thing, but she never pressured me, and we were happy together. Her parents, oddly enough, were lovely people. Her mom was an incredible cook, and her dad, though rough around the edges, had a sharp sense of humor. I never judged them harshly for what they had done. Things fell apart when her parents went to jail, and she moved back to her old house to help take care of her older sister's child. We broke up shortly after. Not my choice, though she might have blamed me for not fully understanding what she was going through. I thought it was unfair for her to give up so much of her high school experience for something that wasn't her fault. Looking back, maybe that was selfish of me, but it's how I felt at the time. I haven't spoken to her since that last conversation over 10 years ago, but I've heard she's doing well. She's married to a good guy and has a child of her own. I'm glad she seems to have built a good life for herself. Her parents' story never made the news in our area, and even now I wouldn't dream of telling my parents about it. It's not my story to share. Story 13. Growing up, my parents were constantly at odds. My dad resented my mom for getting pregnant and forcing their late 60s jet-set lifestyle into a suburban routine. As a result, he refused to spend money on the house, especially on anything related to me. I lived in the basement, which was in terrible condition. The carpet, already over 20 years old, was moldy and grotty. The walls leaked whenever it rained heavily, leaving the drywall crumbling. When I was about 12 or 13, my mom, in one of her defiant moods, decided to fix up my room. She replaced the carpeting and patched up the drywall without telling my dad. Eventually, he found out, and I'm pretty sure she intended for that to happen. They were always fighting. When the workers tore out the old carpet, they discovered a section of padding stuck to the floor because of all the rot. Pulling it up accidentally revealed a hidden hole in the plywood flooring. Beneath the hole was a small, hollowed-out chamber, about the size of a closet. Inside, there were old porn magazines, 2 flashlights, batteries, and some drug paraphernalia, bongs, lighters, and rolling papers. The house had been built in 1958 and owned by the same family until my parents bought it in 1974. The stash likely belonged to the troubled teenage son who had lived in my room before moving out. The workers assumed the stash was mine and decided to be cool about it, never mentioning it to my mom. When I saw it, I thought, "Dag, I have a secret room." It became my hidden refuge, especially since my dad was abusive. Whenever his temper got out of control, I knew I had a place to hide. Unfortunately, his outbursts were often unpredictable, and it was hard to access the chamber without preparation. I had to move furniture, pull back the carpet and padding, and lift the plywood to crawl in. Covering the hole from the inside was nearly impossible. Because of this, I rarely used it in emergencies. Instead, it became a storage space for my junk: old magazines, schoolwork, torn books, and candy wrappers. Whenever my mom told me to clean my perpetually messy room. When I was in high school, my mom tragically took her own life. After that, my dad threw me out of the house. I graduated while crashing at a friend's place and never went back to that room. My dad sold the house as is in 2000. He never took care of the place, and it had become cluttered from his hoarding. Someday, someone will find that hidden chamber again. After sorting through my old Dynamite, Ranger Rick, and World magazines, along with books, clothes, and other remnants from 1975 to 1986, they'll eventually hit the dirt walls. There they'll find a glass bong and a porn stash from the 1960s, a bizarre time capsule from two generations of troubled teens. Story 14. When I was 17, I hosted my first house party while my parents were away for the weekend. It was a typical high school party, lots of beer and liquor, plenty of marijuana, and the usual chaos. Everything went relatively well, except for one friend who unleashed what felt like the most puke ever in the middle of the living room. But that's a story for another day. The next morning, the house was a disaster. It reeked of stale beer and vomit. Every dish was dirty, every towel needed to be washed, and my parents were coming home that afternoon. I spent the entire day cleaning, airing out the house, and getting everything back in order. I managed to handle everything, except for one thing. Someone had sat on this stupid antique footstool in the living room. The one thing I had explicitly told everyone not to mess with. All four legs were snapped off, and it was in 7 pieces. In a panic, I grabbed a tube of liquid nails and some vice grips, and after some effort, I got it back together. It looked fine. At least I hoped it did. When my parents got home, they didn't seem to notice anything was off. I thought I'd pulled it off without a hitch. Fast forward about a year. I had moved out into my first apartment when my dad called me. "You'll never guess what happened last night," he said, laughing. The cat jumped on that antique footstool in the living room, and the whole thing collapsed, broke into 7 pieces. I couldn't help but laugh along, playing it cool. "Wow, that's crazy. Better put that cat on a diet if he smashed the stool like that." To this day, they have no idea the cat had nothing to do with it. Story 15. I feel completely hopeless in life. I'm several years past the legal driving age, but I'm still terrified to get behind the wheel. My first attempt at driving was a disaster. I was with a relative, and I panicked so badly that I made the incredibly stupid mistake of getting out of the car while it was still in drive. The car started moving forward quickly, and my relative had to jump in and turn it off, which damaged the car a bit. Since that experience, I've lost all motivation and confidence to learn how to drive. I still put up a front with my parents, telling them I need to focus on college first or other excuses. But the truth is, I'm just too afraid. Adding to that, I've already failed 2 semesters in college, which only one of my parents knows about. I'm already failing this semester too, and neither of them knows. These things weigh on me every single day, and the fear of them finding out is overwhelming because I know how life-changing these failures are. I've never contemplated suicide because I'm scared it could fail, leaving me in pain, and I don't want to hurt my family. But I constantly have dreams about being in the hospital, where my family tells me, "Your life will end in your sleep." In the dream, I smile and say, "Good, I was never fit for this world anyway." I then say my final goodbyes, confessing everything I've hidden, my fears, my failure to drive, and everything else. This is something I could never admit to my friends, family, or anyone I personally know. Story 16. During the summers, I used to sneak out at night to smoke pot and try whatever other drugs my friends and I could get our hands on. Since my bedroom was on the 2nd floor, I had to sneak out the front door, which was tricky because my parents had a security alarm system. One of the keypads was in their room, so disarming it would wake them up. To get around this, I came up with a plan. I would wait until my parents turned on the alarm for the night, then casually tell them I needed to let the dog out. This gave me an excuse to turn off the alarm. Afterward, I'd turn it back on, but set it to bypass the front door. That way, I could come and go as I pleased without triggering the alarm. One night, everything went wrong. I came back home high out of my mind and walked through the front door, only for the alarm to blare. Turns out, my dog actually needed to go out while I was gone, so my mom woke up, turned off the alarm to let the dog out, and reset it without bypassing the front door. Panicking, I quickly fumbled to turn the alarm off, and then I heard my mom get up. She stepped out of her room, half awake, and called down the stairs asking what I was doing. In my dazed state, the best excuse I could come up with was, "Mom, I needed to get some CDs out of my car." Somehow that worked. She just mumbled something and went back to bed. To this day, I can't believe she bought it. Story 17. When I was a kid, I lived in a suburban neighborhood with 2 sets of cousins. We occupied 3 of the 4 houses in a row, so we were constantly bouncing between houses, playing sports, video games, watching movies, and everything in between. Somehow, my house became the designated spot for indoor golf. This wasn't your standard Nerf sports activity. We turned it into a full-blown passion. We had set holes, a league, and a scoring system. It was intense. Despite using Nerf equipment, within 6 months, we had broken so much stuff in my house that my parents banned indoor golf. A month later, my parents went on vacation, and my brother and I stayed with our aunt and uncle, along with four of our male cousins. Naturally, we couldn't resist the opportunity to revive indoor golf. We told our aunt and uncle we were going to hike in the woods, but instead played an epic six-man, 18-hole game in their house. Somehow, we avoided breaking anything major, but we left 20 to 30 dents in the drywall. Most were minor and hard to spot, but a few required us to shift pictures slightly to hide them. Then came the final hole. The last hole stretched the length of my parents' kitchen and ended by banking off an open door into the study. The challenge? A real golf ball had to be used, and if it touched anything on the ground besides the door, you were docked a stroke and had to start over. It became the bottleneck of the game, and I was in last place going into it. Watching my brother and cousins struggle, I decided to go big. On my turn, I wound up and hit the ball as hard as I could. It cursed through the air, barely missed the door, and smashed straight into the wall, embedding itself perfectly. We were in hysterics, laughing for 15 minutes straight at the sheer ridiculousness of it. When I pulled the ball out, it left an even bigger hole. But I didn't have time to worry. I still had to make my shot. I swung again with all my might, but the head of the plastic club hit the floor first, shattering it. The ball ricocheted off a row of decorative olive oil bottles, shattering one of them. One of the plastic shards lodged itself in my cousin's shin. In panic mode, we cleaned up as best as we could. We replaced the shattered truffle-infused oil with vegetable oil and pickles, which looked nothing alike, filled the hole in the wall with a concoction of newspaper, sawdust, glue, and toothpaste, and bandaged up my cousin. We made up a ridiculous story about a rock skipping off a creek and into his leg. I stayed behind to fix the wall and hung an old picture of my great-grandparents over the hole. Miraculously, my parents didn't notice. Weeks later, my grandmother saw the photo, burst into tears, and thanked my parents for hanging it up. They took credit, and I kept quiet. Years later, when my parents were remodeling the kitchen, they discovered the dents and holes. They questioned my brother and me, but we both played dumb. My dad still tells his friends about the mysterious truffles that look like pickles in that bottle, and I just laugh and retreat every time. To this day, I have no intention of telling them the truth. Story 18. I've been waiting for the right moment to share this one. When I was 14, I was home alone on the 4th of July. My parents had gone out to pick up food for the BBQ and had taken my little sister with them. Like any dumb 14-year-old, I loved fireworks and wanted to blow something up. My parents had left the fireworks where I could see them. Mistake number one. But they had hidden all the lighters and matches. Determined, I spent a few minutes brainstorming how to start a fire without an ignition source. Then it hit me, the stove. I grabbed a stick, turned the electric stove burner on high, and waited. The burner glowed red hot, but the stick just smoked without igniting. After 5 minutes, I gave up on the stick and decided to try something more flammable. Toilet paper. Biggest mistake ever. For those unfamiliar with lighting TP on fire, it ignites instantly and burns all at once. I draped some over my hand, holding the roll, and touched the tip to the burner. It caught fire in a split second, the flames racing up the roll and engulfing it while I was holding it. I panicked and dropped it, right onto the linoleum floor. I had no idea how to put it out, so I just smacked and stomped it frantically. When it was finally extinguished, the fire had melted the floor but didn't do much other damage. Still, the burn marks were impossible to hide, and I freaked out. I called a friend who told me to run away. I packed a backpack with my Game Boy, a water bottle, and then had a better idea. Staged the scene to make it look like an accident. I figured I'd get in less trouble that way. I set the scene to look like I'd accidentally caught one of my mom's dish towels on fire while trying to make ramen. I even burned the towel as evidence. This fire went way smoother than the TP fire. Then I wrote a note. Dear Mom and Dad, I caught the kitchen floor on fire trying to make ramen because I was hungry. I am sorry, I am not coming home until you promise not to kill me. Love, your only son. I took my Game Boy and supplies and ran off to my fort in the woods. My parents, knowing me too well, found me there later. They told me it was okay. They were just glad there wasn't more damage and that I hadn't gotten hurt. To this day, they don't know the real story, but that damn note is still framed and hanging in their den as a conversation piece. Story 19. This might get buried, but here it goes. I was a big partier in high school, despite coming from a good upper-middle-class family with supportive parents. As long as my grades were good and I stayed out of legal trouble, I didn't have a curfew, and my parents didn't ask a lot of questions. My bedroom was on the top floor of our house, complete with its own bathroom and a small attic access point in my closet. It wasn't like one of those pull-down ladder attic doors. It was just a square hole with a piece of sheetrock covering it. Since it required a ladder to access, it was never used, making it a perfect stash spot for anything I didn't want my parents to find. At one party, we wanted to provide a keg. Since we were all underage, we had to rely on someone's older brother to buy and fill a pony keg for us. After the party, none of us knew what to do with the empty keg. Since I'd spent a decent amount of money on it, I decided to keep it. The keg stayed in the trunk of my car for a few days until I had a chance to stash it while my parents weren't home. Naturally, I hid it in the attic through the access in my closet. A couple of years later, I moved out for college and completely forgot about the keg. Now, more than 10 years have passed, and my parents have never mentioned it. I assume it's still sitting up there in the attic, collecting dust. Story 20. About 4 years ago, during my time in a fraternity, we had to choose the next pledge master. I had already realized the frat lifestyle wasn't for me. I didn't drink, smoke, or party, but I did have a reckless thrill for putting myself in dangerous situations. The selection process was supposed to be a debate. The debate took place at my parents' house while they weren't home. It started off well, but as the night went on and the group narrowed down to 2 candidates, things got heated. In a moment of impulsive stupidity, I went upstairs and grabbed 2 Olympic sports sabers that I had as a kid. I had filed down the tips to make them like real swords back then. I suggested that the winner be decided by drawing first blood. My youthful mind thought it would be cool, like something out of a movie. We agreed to the duel and adrenaline took over. It was a blur as we made several passes back and forth. Then I heard my opponent, an ex-bro, yelp in pain. I had skewered him through the side of his abdomen near his kidney. The gravity of what happened hit me instantly. I remember thinking, oh there are real consequences to this. My delusional, reckless world shattered in that moment. Fortunately, there's a happy ending. My opponent recovered fully, and we both learned valuable lessons about the consequences of our actions. He's fine, I'm fine, and we both moved on. But I'll never forget how stupid and dangerous that night was. Story 21. When I was 6 years old, I thought glasses were the coolest thing ever, and I just had to have them. At school, the nurse administered eye exams where you'd look into a machine, describe rows of pictures, and tell her what you saw. When it was my turn, I lied and made up every single answer because I believed failing the test would automatically get me glasses. The nurse was stunned at how poorly I performed and called me back for 2 more tests, which I also failed on purpose. She eventually called my mom to let her know about my severe vision issues and set up an appointment with an eye doctor. At the eye doctor's office, I was put into that machine where the doctor flips lenses and asks if A or B is clearer. I had no clue what I was doing and just kept giving random answers. My responses were so erratic that the eye doctor suspected I might have a neurological issue. This led to a referral to yet another specialist. The neurologist hooked electrodes all over my head and left me alone in a pitch-dark room with a monitor showing random lines and dots. They were measuring my brain activity as I stared at the screen. Of course, the results came back normal because, well, I couldn't fake brain waves. The doctor told my mom it could be a stress-related issue and advised her to monitor me. Meanwhile, I was crushed because I still didn't have glasses. Eventually, I gave up on the idea and moved on. To this day, my mom still brings it up occasionally. Remember that time you had serious eye trouble and it just went away? That was so scary and bizarre. Yep, Mom, totally bizarre. Story 22. My first speeding ticket wasn't for doing 40 in a 30 zone. It was actually for doing 77 in a 55. But I've never told anyone the truth. I was home from college for winter break and heading to my girlfriend's house for New Year's when I got pulled over. To avoid my parents finding out, I wrote to the court and asked that all correspondence be sent to my college address. I also requested that my court date be postponed until spring break. When spring break came around, I casually told my parents I was going to hang out with friends and drove 50 miles to the small-town courthouse. Along the way, I stopped to change into court-appropriate clothes at a parking area. The hearing went smoothly, but by the time I left, it had started snowing heavily. Driving back on the same parkway where I'd been pulled over, I had to go 30 miles per hour the whole way in the dark, snowy conditions. I passed multiple cars that had slid off the road. Since it was early 2005 and I didn't have a cell phone, I was terrified something might happen to me and no one would know where I was. Thankfully, I made it home safely. I changed back into my regular clothes in a parking lot and went on with my evening as if nothing had happened. The next day, I saw the friends I was hanging out with, and a couple of them mentioned they almost called my house looking for me. To this day, my parents have no idea. Story 23. When I was in high school, I got a used '93 stick-shift Jeep Wrangler. My previous car, which had been totaled in an accident weeks earlier, was also a stick. I'd always park my old car by engaging the e-brake and leaving it in neutral. Apparently, it's customary to also leave the car in first gear, but no one ever told me that. And my old car must have had a strong e-brake because it was never an issue. One day, a few weeks after getting my Jeep, I parked facing the windows of a strip mall. While I was getting my hair cut, I noticed in the mirror's reflection that my Jeep was rolling backward. Without thinking, I jumped out of the barber chair, ran outside, and managed to stop the car just before it rolled into a busy 4-lane road. I had my feet planted on the grass between the sidewalk and the curb, while someone else helped hold the car in place. Once I climbed into the driver's seat, I parked it back in the spot, this time in gear. I went back into the barber shop, sat down, and asked my barber not to tell my dad about what had just happened. My dad was coming in after me to get his hair cut. My barber thought the whole thing was hilarious but honored my request. To this day, I can't believe the Jeep didn't hit another car or a light post in that crowded parking lot. I'm now 32, and I still haven't told my parents about it. Maybe one day, but not yet. Story 24. I've never told anyone, apart from a few online friends, and even they don't know everything, about the years I was surely harassed by my dad's landlord. After my parents split, we struggled financially. My mom moved in with her parents for almost a year, and my dad, after the bank foreclosed on our house, ended up renting a room from family friends. He stayed there for 6 years. The landlord, who I'll call D, started coming on to me when I was around 18. At first, I didn't realize what was happening. He would hold my hand or hug me, which I interpreted as comforting gestures during a difficult time in my life. Then he started trying to kiss me. I thought maybe it was a cultural thing. He was Filipino, and I wasn't familiar with their customs. I let him kiss me a few times, which I'm ashamed to admit now, but I'd often push him away and tell him it was inappropriate. D would give me small gifts like gum or soda. I assumed he was doing the same for my siblings since he claimed to consider us family. But then he started asking me not to tell anyone and motioned for me to stay quiet. When my younger brother loudly pointed out that they always give you good stuff, the alarm started going off in my head. Still, I couldn't accept what was happening. My family was already going through so much, and I refused to believe this could be added to it. But the truth was, I was never comfortable in that house. I couldn't be alone there. D would loom over me, try to grab me, or find excuses to touch me. I never told anyone. Part of me was ashamed, and part of me was afraid. I worried that if I spoke up, my dad would be homeless. He had very little money and wouldn't have tolerated D's behavior if he knew. We were also still on good terms with the rest of D's family, and I didn't want to destroy that relationship, so I kept it to myself and endured it. Thankfully, apart from the fear and kissing, nothing worse happened. Eventually, my dad fell out of favor with the family and moved out. I stopped visiting him while he was still living there because I couldn't bear the thought of seeing D again. Before my dad moved, D once told me he wanted to marry me and would leave his family for me. He thought my hesitation was because of our age difference. No, D, it was because you're a disgusting piece of shesh. I've never told this story in full before, and I'm sorry if it's long or confusing. It's just something I've held on to for a very long time. Story 25. I'm kind of hoping this one gets buried. Here it goes. When I was a kid, my father would make us clean up the dog poop in the backyard using a shovel and a paper bag. I hated this chore with a passion. What made it worse was how angry he would get if I didn't start cleaning up as soon as I got home from school. He'd fly into a rage about responsibility, cleanliness, and how he bought these dogs for us. So it was my job to clean up after them. One day I decided I'd had enough. I came home from school and he was already going off about the poop not being picked up. I wasn't in the mood to deal with him. I knew that if I said I had a school project to work on, he'd eventually give up and pick it up himself. While he was mid-rant, I quietly snuck out back, found a spot where I couldn't be seen by the neighbors, and, well, I dropped my own surprise in the yard. I went back inside, told my dad about my project, and went upstairs to watch the scene unfold from my bedroom window. The satisfaction I felt when I saw him go out there and unknowingly clean up my revenge is hard to explain. It's been so long since it happened that it feels too late to tell him now, but man, I still chuckle about it sometimes. Story 26. This doesn't fully fit the criteria since I recently came clean about it, but it's something I kept hidden for years. When I was 18, I tried to kill myself by slitting my wrist. I didn't know at the time that it's up the street, not across the road. A lot had built up to that point, but the immediate trigger was being at a party where a guy took advantage of me. He was on top of me, and in my head, the only way out was to end my life. I pulled a buck hunting knife out of my back pocket and sliced my arm as hard and deep as I could. The guy jumped off me and called my best friend into the room. Everyone else freaked out. They eventually wrapped my arm and got me into my friend's car, and she drove me to the hospital. When we got there, I lied to the hospital staff and told them I'd been jumped and slashed with a box cutter. I kept that story up even when giving a statement to the police and explaining things to my family. It wasn't until a couple of years ago that I finally told my family the truth. I admitted that I'd done it to myself and explained the reasons why. Surprisingly, coming clean brought us closer. It improved my relationships with them in ways I didn't expect, and I'm glad I finally told them. Story 27. When I was 16, I lived in a rural area and commuted 40 minutes to school in a small country town. Most of my friends lived in town, so I often stayed with them over the weekends and caught the bus home after school on Mondays. Some older friends of theirs, around 18 to 19 years old, rented an old historic weatherboard house on the edge of town, which quickly became the ultimate party house. We spent weekends there, smoking weed by the ounce, dropping acid, listening to Hendrix, and wreaking havoc with a beat-up pool table. The house was chaos. One night, a friend put an axe through the TV during a party, inspired by the young ones, and we melted the circuit boards into strange sculptures. The place attracted police attention. One morning after a party, the cops showed up and searched the house, finding long-lost bongs, including a homemade six-pipe cookie jar hookah. They were clearly disappointed to find we were just stoners and not drug dealers. Now to the incident. The toaster in the kitchen was broken. The lever wouldn't stay down unless something heavy rested on it. One night, in a smoke-filled haze, I decided I wanted toast. I set up the toaster, used the handle of a jaffle maker to hold the lever down, and went back to the lounge, completely forgetting about it. The smoke in the lounge was so thick from the weed that no one noticed the smell of burning toast. No one noticed as the kitchen posters caught fire, or as the flames began to consume the oil-soaked wood walls. By the time we realized it, the house was an inferno. We ran outside, watching as the flames roared down the hallway. The house was gone in an hour. Everyone was so stoned they thought it was hilarious. Everyone except me. I was terrified. To this day, no one knows how the fire started, except for you now. Story 28. My parents were good people, but they had incredibly high expectations for me. They wanted me to get into a top university and choose what they saw as the best career path. I don't know what was wrong with me at the time. Maybe I was just burned out, but I couldn't meet their expectations. I performed miserably in my university admissions. They constantly criticized my poor life choices and average performance. Their disappointment became overwhelming, and I felt paranoid and strange, constantly trying to escape their disapproval. I thought about ending it all. I considered hanging myself, but never had the chance to be alone. I thought about sharp objects, but worried about the shame it would bring to my family. Somehow, I managed to hang on, even as I felt like I was dangling off a cliff. Eventually, I got into a decent university. I started reading philosophy obsessively, which helped me understand that disappointment is a part of life and that my problems were smaller than they seemed. I'm grateful I didn't give up. Now I'm doing okay in life. Every year when I visit home, everything feels surreal. I've changed a lot, and my perception of my parents has shifted. I'm not sure if I should thank them, forgive them, or limit my interactions with them. It leaves me in a state of confusion every time. Story 29. This is probably going to get buried, but I've never told anyone this story. 13 months ago, I almost ended my life. Growing up, it was just my mom and me. No dad, no siblings, no extended family, no one else. We were the entire family, just the two of us. I've struggled with depression for as long as I can remember, and sometimes it gets really bad. One day it hit so hard that it felt unbearable. The pain was constant, and I wanted out. Through tears, I pulled out my pistol, chambered a round, and pressed the barrel against my head. I can still remember the cold steel against my scalp and the faint rustling sound it made as it scraped my short hair. My finger was on the trigger and I started applying pressure, thinking to myself, inhale, exhale, and squeeze. As I sat there trying to find the courage to pull the trigger, my mind started racing through my life in its entirety. It felt like an all-out war, pain and the desire to escape on one side, fighting against survival instincts and the faint will to live on the other. Then a thought popped into my head. What will this do to your mom? I'm an analytical person, so I couldn't help but explore that angle. I thought about it deeply, picturing how my Suis would affect her. I realized it would destroy her completely, like a bullet to her heart. She's been through so much already and it would break her in ways I couldn't fathom. And I couldn't do that to her. So I put the gun down and cried. I cried harder than I ever had before. I locked the gun away and I haven't touched it since. I could never tell my mom about this. It would change everything for her, and not in a good way. She doesn't need to carry the weight of that day. It's enough that I chose to stay for her. Story 30. I've never told my parents that I'm transgender. Growing up in a time before the internet and widespread awareness of what it meant to be trans, I didn't have the words or understanding for what I felt. My dad, who has since passed, would have been devastated and wouldn't have understood. My mom is elderly now, and it's not in her best interest to learn that her son considers herself to be her daughter. I didn't come to terms with my identity until much later in life, when it was too late for me to transition or have surgery. As far as my mom knows, I still live as male, though I spend a lot of time living as a woman since we live in different cities. There's nothing I want more than to have a mother-to-daughter relationship with her, but I can't bring myself to put her through the stress and confusion this late in her life. As a young teen, I was often alone after school while my parents worked. My mom kept a beautiful red dress in my closet because it was larger than hers. Every day I'd put it on and walk around the house practicing how to sit and twirl the skirt. One day I found her lipstick in a drawer. At first I was hesitant to try it, fearing it wouldn't come off easily. But eventually I worked up the courage to put it on fully, pairing it with the dress, nylons, and a pair of her heels. I spent 15 glorious minutes in that outfit, even stuffing socks to give myself boobs. But then panic would set in. I'd quickly wash off the lipstick and put everything back, terrified of getting caught. Once my dad pulled into the driveway while I was still dressed. I ran to the bathroom, locked the door, and hid everything in the hamper. He waited outside and I prayed he wouldn't open the hamper when he finally got in. Thankfully, he didn't. After dinner, I quietly returned everything to its place. Throughout high school, I wore almost my mom's entire wardrobe in secret. Every night, I dreamed of being a girl, feeling trapped in a body that felt alien to me. I've lived my entire life hiding who I am. Today, young people in similar situations have more resources and acceptance. While transitioning is never easy, it's more understood and accepted now than it was when I was young. Even with more progressive parents, it's still challenging, but at least it's not unheard of. My mom will never know the truth about me. She'll go to her grave without knowing her daughter. It's sad, but I truly believe it's what's best for her. Story 31. When I was a junior in high school, I threw a huge party in our detached garage, which my stepdad and I had recently renovated into a 2-story apartment. It had everything: a full bathroom, kitchen, upstairs living area, built-in bar, the works. It was the perfect spot for a party. At some point during the night, 3 of my friends decided to head upstairs to do who knows what. In their drunken state, they thought it'd be hilarious to punch holes in our brand new upstairs door. They kept going until the holes resembled a face, and then, for some reason, poured beer down the door, dropped cigarettes into the holes, and pretended the door was smoking. Classic, stupid, drunk high school stuff. When I saw what they'd done, I was furious. I kicked them out, renounced our friendship on the spot, and knew I had to fix the damage fast. My uncle came over to help. We took the door off its hinges and went out the next morning to buy the exact same door. We sanded, painted, and rehinged it, making sure it looked perfect. My parents were due back home at 3 p.m., and by the time they arrived, the door was as good as new. To this day, no one ever found out about the damage or the party, and no one ever will. Story 32. This isn't a huge deal, and I'll probably tell my parents eventually, but I got into a minor car accident back in August. It was completely my fault. I had a massive brain fart while pulling out of a driveway and didn't really look to my left properly. As soon as I noticed a car speeding toward me, I floored it to get across the road, but she clipped my back bumper. To our surprise, there wasn't even a scratch on either car. She was also a young and inexperienced driver, so we both agreed to just let it go and not make a big deal out of it since no one was hurt and there was no damage. Honestly, the collision was so minor I wouldn't have known it happened if it weren't for the sound it made. I had only had my license for about a year at the time, so I haven't told my parents yet because I don't want them to lose trust in my driving abilities over one stupid mistake. At least I floored it when I did. If I hadn't, my car probably would have been totaled, and I might have ended up with a broken leg. My friends still think I'm one of the best drivers they know, even after hearing about the incident. It was a screw-up, sure, but it's life. These things happen. Story 33. When I was about 15, I got a pretty bad case of poison ivy. One day, while treating it with alcohol on a paper towel, teenage me had a brilliant idea. I thought it'd be cool to light the paper towel on fire, imagining it would burn just a small section, like a torch. Of course, that's not what happened. The alcohol-soaked paper towel immediately burst into flames. In my panicked state, my brain somehow decided that dropping it wasn't an option because it might set the house on fire. Luckily, I was standing near the bathroom. I rushed over, threw the flaming paper towel into the sink, and doused it with water. But those few seconds were long enough for me to get burned. Pretty badly, too. Teenage logic struck again, and instead of admitting what had happened, I decided to cover it up. I cleaned up the paper towel and came up with a convincing lie. I grabbed a frying pan, put it on the stove, and gingerly pressed my palm onto it, pretending that's how I got the second-degree burn. I woke my dad up and told him I had tripped over my baggy pants and caught myself on the frying pan. He bought the story, and to this day, my parents have no idea about my moment of stupidity. Only 2 other people know the truth, and neither of them are my parents. Story 34. I've never told my parents that I used to smoke weed, or that I got arrested because of it. When I was in my late teens and early 20s, I was a pretty heavy smoker. I had at least one joint almost every day. Most of the time, I smoked away from home so my parents wouldn't find out. When I was 18, I made the dumb decision to smoke in my parked car in a bus stop area. I was with 2 friends just chatting and relaxing, completely oblivious to our surroundings. A police car rolled by, stopped, reversed, and pulled up next to us. Apparently, the packets of Rizla and Golden Virginia I'd left on the dashboard were a dead giveaway. The officer approached the car, and by this point, we were all panicking. We'd been hotboxing, so when I rolled down the window, a thick stream of smoke poured out. The officer gave me a look that said it all. Officer: good evening. Is that marijuana I smell? Me: nope. Officer: Get out of the car, please, sir. Having never had any interaction with the police before, I quickly admitted that the drugs were mine. We only had enough left for maybe one joint anyway. I was arrested for possession, taken to the station, and kept in a cell for 6 hours. They interviewed me about where I got the weed, but honestly, the rest of the experience is a bit of a blur. What shocked me most was that when I was finally released and dropped back at my car, my friends were still in it. I'd taken the keys with me when I was arrested and hadn't locked the car, so they stayed to make sure it didn't get stolen. Gotta love your friends for that level of loyalty. To this day, my parents have no idea about any of this. Story 35. When I was in elementary school, my family fostered babies and toddlers. We usually tried to care for just one child at a time, but the system was so overwhelmed that we often ended up with 2. Once we even had 3, twin babies and their older brother, who was my age, around 9. One summer day, my mom was outside supervising the 2 toddlers as they played. My older sister was upstairs sick, and my mom asked me to watch the babies for a few minutes while she went to check on her. I said sure, but stayed on the couch watching TV. A few minutes later, I heard splashing outside. I ran out and saw that one of the boys had pushed aside the screen covering our small pond and fallen in. The pond was tiny, about 1 meter in diameter, but 2 meters deep. Panicking, I pulled him out, completely soaking myself in the process. As I carried him inside to yell for my mom, I noticed his head was bleeding. I screamed up the stairs and she rushed down, grabbed the injured toddler, and sent me across the street with the other baby to ask our family friends to watch him. She then took my brother and me home and rushed to the ER. Later that evening, she came home with a happy toddler who had a couple of staples in his head. I told my parents I had been watching the other boy and had my back to the pond when the accident happened. They reassured me it wasn't my fault. There was a CPS investigation, but they ruled it as an accident, and we were allowed to continue fostering. That Christmas, my dad even bought me a charm for my bracelet with a healing cross symbol and the boy's name engraved, saying he was proud I had saved his life. What they don't know, and what I'll never tell them, is that it was entirely my fault. I hadn't gotten off the couch to watch the boys like my mom had asked. To this day, I've never told anyone this. Story 36. My first job was at a hardware store, and over the couple of years I worked there, I got a few of my friends' jobs there too. One of them, Rick, ended up getting caught stealing from the register on camera and was fired. Fast forward a few weeks, my parents went out of town, so naturally I threw a party at my house. My 21-year-old manager, Craig, agreed to buy us beer, and the party was going great, until around 11 p.m. when Craig called and said he wanted to join. Usually, Craig was a chill guy, so I said, sure, come on over. When Craig arrived, though, he was already 20 beers deep and immediately started stumbling around my house, accusing random people of being Rick and trying to pick fights. Rick left the party early on, probably to avoid the drama. Craig, however, was just getting started. His accusations escalated, and soon he was throwing punches at anyone he thought looked like Rick. People began leaving, and I told Craig he needed to get out of my house. After a brief scuffle, I managed to get him outside, but then he started trying to brawl with me and a few others in the street. Worried about the cops showing up, we were in a nice neighborhood near the police station. We ran back inside. Craig, however, grabbed a yard statue and started using it as a battering ram on my front door. I gathered the remaining 10 or so people at the party, told them to get ready and open the door. Craig immediately threw me into a glass table, shattering it and scattering broken glass everywhere. A massive fight broke out in the entryway while my girlfriend, in tears, swept up glass in the background. At some point, Craig smashed his face on the stone near the fireplace during the chaos. We eventually subdued him, tied him up with extension cords, and kept him from escalating further. Once he calmed down, or couldn't fight anymore, we dumped him in front of his apartment complex. His girlfriend found him and took him inside. He ended up needing $500 worth of dental work to fix his face. The next day, I skipped school to replace the broken glass table from a specialty store in another town. However, the bloodstains on the carpet were impossible to remove. When my parents got home, my mom pulled me aside and asked, "Honey, I won't be mad, but what's up with these huge stains on the carpet?" "Grape juice," I said, hoping she wouldn't press further. She thought I meant wine, but being a mom, somehow managed to clean up the stains. To this day, my parents have no idea what actually happened that night.